AHDB, and today I'm joined by strategic dairy farmer Michael Ball from Coton Wood farm in Derbyshire and Mark Hall from Trouw Nutrition as we look at improving transition in an all-year-round herd. My colleague Nick Parsons will also be along to give us an update on the SDF network. So good afternoon to you all.
Afternoon.
I just want to outline a couple of housekeeping points for this afternoon. All attendees are muted. This webinar will be recorded and available on YouTube afterwards. And if you're registered with Dairy Pro, you can collect your points by putting your details into the chat box. You can ask questions today by using the chat box function. So if you see the orange arrow on the right side of your screen, if you click that and expand it out, there will be a questions box on the right hand side at the bottom. All questions are anonymous, so please feel free to give us any question you have today, and we'll aim to answer all of these throughout the webinar today. If you'd like to join a more in-depth discussion after this webinar, or if it has raised some questions you would like answered, Michael, along with Mark Hall, will be hosting a discussion type meeting on the 27th of April. This is for dairy levy payers only, and there'll be more details to follow at the end on how you register for that. So today's webinar is based around our strategic dairy farmers, Michael and Tony. So for the listeners who have never visited Coton Wood before, Michael, could you give us a quick background about what you guys do over at Coton Wood?
Yes. Yeah. Hello, everyone. We run about 500 milking cows, all in a robotic milking system. Run on a mixed grass mayside in the winter, a grass mayside in summer with zero graze grass for the high yielders. They stop in all year round. The low yielders, they go out to graze during the day, and they stop in at nights. That's really the basic system. The dry cow group are in two groups, far offs and close-ups. Close-ups come in about 3 weeks prior to calving. The dry cows are out. The far off dry cows are out to grass on like pasture straw. And we've over the last probably 3-4 years, we have built a little bit with the transition cows. A lot of cows come without much milk. And you know, struggling a bit for rumen fill as well, and we just feel that the transition hasn't quite been working for us. Once again, to milk, they seem to go on quite well. You know, and you know, metabolic profile we've gone down. That the issues have been around either side of calving. You know, once they're up and away and in milk, then you hope fine. Even the cows are getting plenty of milk, coping fine. So you know, it's a big focus for us over a number of years. We've tried several different, you know, particularly ways of feeding them, nutritional wise, without really, you know, quite hitting the nail on the head, I think. And yeah, that's the purpose of bringing Mark in today, to hopefully shed some light on what's possibly been going wrong. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Michael, for that brief overview. I'd like to pass over to Mark Hall now, who is the Technical Manager at Trouw Nutrition, for today's presentation. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Right, share my screen quickly. Okay, Hannah and Michael, can you see that okay?
Yes, that looks good to me.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, afternoon everyone, and thank you for taking some time out of your day on what is a lovely sunny day to join us, have a bit of a chat through all things transition. As Hannah said, I'm Mark Hall. I'm the Technical Manager here at Trouw Nutrition GB, based over in Ashbourne there. We are predominantly a vitamin and premix mineral manufacturer. We do a huge amount of research and development in dairy cows in general, with a big focus on transition. So hopefully the aim of today is to give you guys a bit of practical tips and tools to take back to some of your herds at home, so that you can apply stuff at home and hopefully pull out a few small bits and pieces that can improve your transition going forward. So we'll crack on. as we all know, what are we actually expecting of our cows? We all know transition is the most stressful time through the whole cow's period there. Transition is an absolute nightmare and can cause some real headaches for a lot of farms. So what are we actually expecting cows to do? We're expecting them to stop milking, produce a calf, give birth to that calf, eat as much as physically possible, as quickly as possible, give 40 litres plus, don't have any issues, and get back in calf, all within a very, very small window there. So it's a big ask. You know, it's a huge amount of time, effort that we're trying to put into these cows to get them over this incredibly stressful period of time there. So we're trying to do it all within a very, very small window throughout the year. So looking at the dry period itself, what's the point? You know, why do we even need a dry period? Why do we not just let cows sort of milk on through? And what is the overall point of it? Now, we all know it's a recovery period. We all know we need that dry period there so she can regenerate that mammary tissue, produce that calf, and generally prepare for the next lactation. To put it in calorie terms, it's always a nice way of looking at it. I think a 30-litre cow is the human equivalent of running 2 marathons every day. So I'll just give you a minute for that to sink in. 2 marathons every single day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. I think we would all need a small break after running 2 marathons a day for, in theory, 305 days of the year. That is the equivalent of a 30-litre cow there. So I think in all of this, they probably earned a little bit of a break. And the big thing with dry cows as well is we often treat them as second-class citizens. They're the only cows on the farm that, in theory, aren't earning us any money. They're not producing milk at this point. Yes, they are producing a calf, but effectively they're sat there eating, not putting anything back into the system. But in reality, they are the most important cow on the farm. If you get transition right, if you get the dry cow period right, in theory, the rest of it should fall into place quite quickly. When I say transition cow as well, we're normally talking about that 60 days around calving, so 30 days pre and 30 days post. It's that window there that is really key in this period of time. And obviously, one of the big questions I get asked a lot when we start talking about dry period is how long should it be? Quite simply, the work would suggest the higher the yield, the longer the dry period. But the most important part of the puzzle there is do not drop below 45 days. Whether you go for a 60-day or a 45-day is often completely down to personal preference or type of system you're running, the facilities you've got on farm. But as long as you're not dropping below that 45-day period, you're not going to see too much of an impact on the next lactation. As soon as we start getting down to 35 days, we start to see some real impacts in milk and production on that next lactation there. We're losing up to 10% of our milk if we drop that dry period down to 35 days. And it's a gradual slippery slope as soon as we get past that 45-day point. So for me personally, the guys I work with on farm, a 60-day dry period is pretty optimal, especially for your higher yielding herds out there. But the key point in all of this is do not drop it below that 45-day period. They need that time to rest, they need that time to regenerate and prepare themselves for that next lactation. As soon as we drop it below that period, we lose a huge amount of milk going into the next lactation there. So moving on to the big one, disease incidents. And one thing I'd like people just to consider today is how many of your cows on your farms at home do we think never quite reach their full potential? If we look at data, and we've got hundreds of thousands of data points here, we think roughly 76% of cows experience some form of transition issue. So do we think these cows ever really hit their peak milk yield? Probably not, is the answer. Usain Bolt didn't break the 100-meter world record with a cold, for instance. Cows are exactly the same. Yeah. So if we've got an insult over that transition period, whether it's in the dry period or whether it's in the fresh period, cows probably are never going to reach their full potential. So any slight insult over that period is going to knock litres off their potential peak performance, and we're never going to see those litres in the tank. And the big thing about transition as well is it's not litres that you're going to call the vet for. It's not litres that you're going to call the nutritionist for. It's litres that you're never just going to see. They're never going to be there. So you're never going to know they weren't there, for instance. So the big thing with transition is trying to find those liters that just because we don't see them in the tank, just because we don't necessarily call the vet or the nutritionist, doesn't mean they're not there. So when you're looking at your farms at home, what's stopping your cows from achieving their peak milk yield? Where are those 76% of those issues coming from? Is it milk fevers? Is it LDAs, retained cleansings? Is it social stress? Whatever it might be, what's actually causing those cows to never quite reach that peak potential there? And obviously, I've thrown up on the slide there some of the averages for the UK for metabolic disease incidence. You may well know what your metabolic disease incidence is. You may not know what your metabolic disease incidence is. If you don't know, I would encourage you to find out. I believe AHDB do some very easy to use wall charts that we can stick up in a parlour or next to a calving pen and just put a tick next to whichever cow had which individual metabolic disease. Monitoring transition disease, those metabolic disease incidences on your farm is vitally important. It is the most important metric for me around transition, is what the success and failure is of that transition system there. So how many milk fevers you're getting, how many LDAs, how many retained cleansings, and be honest with yourself as well. We've all got our favorite cows on the herd. Just because she's your favorite cow doesn't mean she had any less of a milk fever than your least favorite cow. So be honest with yourself when you're recording some of these transition incidences, because it's really important that we don't make excuses for our favorite cow, for instance. The big thing with farms in GB as well is we're all guilty of putting on our farm blinkers. We're dealing with the same cows, the same facilities, the same unit day in, day out. And we're all guilty of doing it. I'm guilty of doing it. We all walk around like this with tunnel vision, and we choose to ignore the issues that are going on either side of us because we come to a level of acceptance of what's actually normal on farm. I once had the pleasure of sitting down with a farmer who was sat at just over 40% milk fevers on his herd. Didn't realize that was an issue because that's how cows calve. Cows get milk fever. So that guy had come to such a level of acceptance around what milk fever is and what calving is that he actually accepted 40% milk fevers on his herd. Now, of course, when we sat down and explained to this poor chap that 6% is in fact the national average and 40% is a disaster around transition, we were soon able to do some things to reduce those milk fevers down. And that particular farmer now is sat at just over 3% milk fevers. But it's that acceptance of what is normal on your farm that I want you to try and challenge as we go through this presentation today. So if you take nothing else out of this and you completely ignore me for the rest of the session, challenge the norm. Find out where your problems are on your farm. What's your biggest bottleneck and how do you think you can solve it? Yeah, challenge your nutritionist, challenge your vet. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? How do we improve this? How do we improve that? More importantly, how do we stop it happening again? So if you're getting milk fevers, if you're getting LDAs, if those figures are anywhere near some of the national averages I put on the screen there, the targets are considerably lower than that. So milk fevers, for instance, we should be aiming for less than 4%, LDAs less than 1%, retained cleansings around the sort of 4 to 6% mark there. If yours over that or at that, they're not zero, so there's room to improve. So challenge the norm, challenge that, challenge that nutritionist, and see what we can actually do to try and improve transition for those cows over that period of time. So, Michael, you're the only farmer I can actually ask a question to now. Do you guys know where your transition disease incidence is at the minute? Can you hear me, Michael? No. Maybe not. Okay, we'll move on. And
yeah, we use a transition monitoring service, and obviously someone comes around once a month, scores cows for room fills, lameness, etc. So yeah, we record it by that, all milk fevers, retained cleansing, etc. I think milk and retained cleansing are both around about 2%. LDAs are well below 1%, below 0.5%. So it's not really that's been the issue. You know, the cows calve generally without much problem. But it's just, you know, the milk yield side of things that we've been sort of focused.
Yeah,
that's been the issue.
Got you. Okay, fantastic. I mean, the fact you record it in the first place, absolutely brilliant. That is the starting point in all of this. The fact that it's low, you know, we can start to look in other areas that we might be able to improve on to start improving that fresh cow performance. But for people listening at home, if you're not recording it, start recording it. If you are, take a critical look at where those figures are. Can you improve them? Can you be any better? And why you're actually getting the issues that you're getting. So people always tell me the perfect cow doesn't exist, but this is Aftershock 3918. I'm sure most of you have heard of her before. She's the current 365-day world record holder, 98 kilos a day, every day for 365 days. Phenomenal cow, 5'2", weighs just under a ton. An absolute production machine, really. Now, obviously, if we all had a herd of Aftershock 3918s, it would be fantastic. Life would be incredibly easy. But unfortunately, we don't live in the land of unicorns and puppy dogs, and we don't all have herds of Aftershock 3918s. So how do we manage our cows? How do we manage our systems with the facilities we've got? I always put up this slide because there's two main points to it. The first of those points is this cow here has never had an issue in her life. She's never been lame. She's never had a massive cell count. She's never had a metabolic disease. She is completely bomb-proof. And because she's bomb-proof, that is how she's actually reached that potential. That's how she's reached that 98 kilos a day, because she's never had an issue. She's been managed perfectly over that period of time. If you talk to her owners, she is the most habitual cow in the world. She comes to the same spot in the milking parlour. She feeds at the same spot in the feed fence, and she lies in the same bed every single day. That cow is completely bomb-proof. Never had an issue, which is why she's got to that level of production. The second point on this slide is transition is transition. It doesn't matter whether you're an Aftershock giving 98 kilos a day or whether you're a 15 kilo a day dairy cow. Whatever it might be, the process of drying off, having a dry period, having a calf, coming back into milk is exactly the same, yeah, irrelevant of yield. So the principles of transition management are exactly the same no matter what your yield aspirations are. You might be looking at not even a third of that yield. You might be happy with a 20 or 25 litre average, 30, 35, 40 or 45, whatever it is. Your transition process is exactly the same. Same thing that cows go through in that 60-day period there. So 2 points around that slide. A, she's a bomb-proof cow. So what can your cows do if we reduce some of these lameness incidences, some of these transition incidences, reduce stress, whatever it might be? And the big thing is transition is transition. Doesn't matter what your targets are. The principles of transition management are the same for every cow. So let's move on to some of the practicalities around transition then. Body condition scoring, obviously no transition talk would be complete without a piece on body condition scoring, and I'm sure some of you are sat there rolling your eyes, but it is incredibly important. But we all have our own idea of where we want cows to be on this body condition score scale there. And I'm sure we all have a huge amount of variation within our herds, which obviously adds another layer of challenge to managing cows over this period of time. But where do we actually need cows to be? And what score should we be aiming for in our dry pens? Michael, what would your average body condition score be of your dry cows at the minute, do you think?
It's round about 3.
Round about 3.
Yeah. There's been a few a bit lean of late, but certainly at the moment probably stay with 3. I think on average we average round about 3 across the board.
Round about 3.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Well, keep that one in mind. I say condition score of 3 there, absolutely perfect. No problem at all with that. The big thing is in a lot of farms we've all got our own idea of what body condition scoring is and some of the parameters there. So hopefully this slide just gives you an idea of where they should be because ideally everyone should be body condition scoring the exact same way, but in reality on farm, everyone has their own slightly different interpretation of the body condition scoring scale. But if we move on and just look at how important it actually is, if we look at some of the science around body condition scoring, if we take this graph, for instance, now, if we look at this graph in isolation on its own, you would think all of your cows need to be as thin as possible to maximize those dry matter intakes post-calving. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's all about dry matter intakes post-calving. It's all about getting cows to eat as much as physically possible, minimize any issues post-calving there. So look at this graph. In theory, thin cows are the goal, right? Condition score of 1.8 clearly yields the highest dry matter intake post-calving. The fatter those cows get, the less they eat. So in theory, we want all of our cows to be incredibly thin, yeah? In reality, this is a pretty dangerous graph to look at in isolation. And worryingly, this is the graph, or this is the principle that a lot of vets, a lot of nutritionists, a lot of farmers have hung their transition management hat on over the last few years. I've come across a huge number of people over the years wandering around farms, wandering around the industry, who recommend body condition scores for dry cows of 2.5 or less. Now, in the real world, we certainly do not want our cows to look like hat racks at the point of calving. 2.5 or less is a really, really dangerous area to have our dry cows in terms of body condition score. Hopefully, we'll convince you of that in the next few slides here. So in reality, what we really want to do is avoid both of the extremes. We all know we need to avoid fat cows. Fat cows, everyone has got that in their head. Fat cows bring a huge amount of issues. They limit their intakes post-calving. They mobilize a huge amount of body fat to cope for that drop in dry matter intake. They've got a massive increase in post-calving issues when it comes to milk fevers, LDAs, retained cleansings, etc. And they're much, much more likely to have problems in general. So fat cows, we all know. Fat cows, bad. Try and avoid them as much as physically possible. But what about thin cows? Looking at that graph on the last slide there, in theory, thin cows are the goal. But again, it's a dangerous thing to take that graph in isolation. In reality, thin cows cause us just as many issues, if not more issues, than fat cows do. The big problem with the thin animal is the fact that they are thin in the first place. They have nothing to cope with any insult or injury that we throw at them. So heat stress, social stress, group changes, lameness, mastitis, milk fever, the process of calving itself, any extra thing that causes that animal stress is going to cause an issue for her. She has got no bodily reserves to actually cope with those extra issues that she needs to deal with over this pretty stressful period of time. Everything for that cow needs to come from the feed fence. So it's a really important when we're looking at transition cows over this period of time to try and minimize both fat and thin cows. Because what's going to happen to those thin cows when they inevitably do get a stressor over that period of time, they're probably going to die because they've got nothing to see them through that period. And it's often that simple. So thin cows and fat cows, when we're looking at body condition scoring of transition cows, 2.75 to 3.5 is the bracket that we ideally need to be keeping these cows in. Now, this is a really nice piece of work that I did, or we did with the previous company, Premier, and I think this slide sums up pretty nicely where we should be aiming for with this body condition score on our dry cows. That big green box there is the target, that 2.75 to 3.5. So what we can basically see here is the risk of clinical ketosis based on body condition score. As we've already said, our fat cows, we see a massive increase in that fat mobilization. You can see that line drop off and that risk shoots through the roof there. On the thin side, we can see the exact same thing happening. As cows start getting below that 2.75, we see that risk of ketosis increase significantly. So just because cows are thin doesn't mean they can't mobilize body fat. Just because they can't mobilize it, it's the body fat that you can't see that they're mobilizing. And that's the problem with our thin cows. body condition scoring thin cows is an absolute nightmare. They might not look like they're losing a huge amount of external fat, but internally those cows are screaming because they're using all of the last ditch fat that surrounds the organs there. This is what leaves them with no reserves and leads us into a bit of a vicious circle, because no matter how good our transition management is, cows are going to lose weight whilst those intakes creep up to meet milk yields there. So it's really important that we do give them just a bit of a buffer to A, cope with that drop in intake, and B, cope with any extra stresses that we might add in over that period of time, whether that's through social stress, whether it's through lameness, whatever it might be. So ideally, avoid those girls there. Anything over 3.5, anything below 2.75, avoid those girls. Try and keep all of the cows where physically possible inside that 2.75 to 3.5 region there. Okay.
Mark, we just have a couple of questions coming in regards to the last couple of slides. So one was actually about that dry period and the length of that dry period. One person was asking, how do you recommend drying off cows at 30 kilos of milk a day, 30 kilos plus of milk a day? How would you get these girls dried off?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and one we do get asked quite a lot. My highest yielding herds are quite regularly drying off cows, giving sort of 30 litres plus, and they do absolutely nothing special. They tube them and they go onto a dry cow ration, and that is it. Would not recommend putting cows onto straw for a period of 24 hours. I'd certainly not recommend going from 3 to 2 to once a day milking. I would do it absolutely no differently than anyone else. Literally tube it, stick it in a dry cow pen. Standard drying off protocols do work incredibly well. For a lot of my high yielding herds, all of my high yielding herds, they don't do anything different to what a conventional drying off protocol would look like. That's a great point.
Just another one there. So how would you get a cow to gain condition during the dry period if she is a bit thin when drying her off? Is there a way of getting her to gain any weight in that dry period?
Yeah, another good question. We'll come on to that one, if I may, in a couple of slides' time. And if I don't answer your question, please do ask again, because hopefully in the next couple of slides, we'll be able to explain that one.
Perfect.
That's all right.
And just for our listeners, we do have body condition scorecards available at AHDB as well if you need some help and guidance, and drying off resources. So just keep on coming in with your questions there, and back to you, Mark.
Great stuff, thank you. So moving on to diets then, and sort of coming back to that second question there just a bit, and how we actually control body condition score in the dry period. As we all know, most cows will gain weight in the dry period, but unless that cow is particularly thin to start with, it's ideally not something we want to avoid, really. We want to avoid gaining weight over that dry period where possible. Obviously, the best method is to do this through controlled energy diets, so reasonably high straw diets, the Goldilocks type systems. Dry cows have an energy requirement of around 120 megajoules a day. Anything over this, and we will gain weight. So for those of you who are starting off with reasonably thin dry cows, quite easy to gain weight over this period of time. Just feed over 120 megajoules, and that will increase the condition score of those cows. If you're starting at a 2.5 and want to get them up to a 3, it doesn't take long at all. Slight increase in energy in that far off period will really get those cows to where they need to be in the close-up period. As we can see from the graph there, the far off diet doesn't actually have a huge impact on what cows do in the fresh period. It's the close-up diet that's really going to have an impact on how cows perform. So going back to the second question earlier, if you need to gain weight in your dry cows, the far off period is the place to do it. So ideally, gain a bit of weight there, get them into the condition score that you want them in, and then maintain that throughout the close-up period there. Any weight gain or weight loss in the close-up period is going to affect how cows perform in that post-calving period there. So we see a big impact on performance based on that close-up diet. So if we see big increases in body condition score in that close-up period, we're going to see big decreases in that body condition score for those close-up cows. Controlled energy diets there, the CE versus the high energy diets in HE there, we've got a big difference in body condition score change. So it's really important we control the amount of energy that our cows are getting in that dry period there, so they don't lose too much weight in the fresh period. As I say, it all comes down to fat cows limiting their intakes post-calving. And the big thing with cows as well is the fatter they are, as we've already said, the more they'll limit their intakes, the more we'll see that drop in body condition score post-calving. So it's really important that we do control that energy, keep it around that sort of 120 to 140 megajoules per day mark. And that's not just an isolated study. There are countless studies out there all saying the exact same thing. Cows need to be on a controlled energy diet pre-calving to minimize that drop in dry matter intake post-calving. So don't steam cows up. Don't add a proportion of the milking cow ration to your dry cow diet, and do keep a lid on how much energy your cows are getting, because the size of that drop in dry matter intake before calving is much larger in cows overfed energy in that dry period. And obviously dry matter intake in the fresh period is going to be the biggest driver of how well your cows do or don't perform in that period of time. So if we can limit the amount of energy those animals are getting, we're going to maximize the intakes post-calving, we're going to maximize performance, and then we're going to maximize milk yield in those fresh cows. So if we pick on Michael for a bit, I'm sorry, Michael, but you're the only farmer who can respond at the minute. Break down that dry cow ration as it currently stands. At the minute, we're about 176 megajoules per cow per day. Breaking down the maths in the dry cow ration there equates to roughly 52.5 kilos of body weight gained over that 30-day close-up period there. So 52 kilos of weight in 30 days. That's a pretty significant weight gain that we're looking at in that 30-day period. Do we think it's an issue? And probably more importantly, do we visibly see the cows gain that weight over this period of time? Michael, do you think you see 52 kilos of weight being gained in that 30-day close-up period?
I don't think you physically see it. The only time you really see it is if occasionally we have heifers that have been running the bull that might be in there a little bit longer than the sort of the 3 to 4 weeks that we expect. If they're in there for maybe 6 weeks, you can certainly see put weight on. But over this 3 to 4 weeks, I don't really think you can sit just at them particularly.
And that right there, I think, is part of the problem when it comes to managing dry cows, is that 52.5 kilos there, we're never going to see all of it on those cows, because a huge amount of that body weight is going to be laid internally. So the way cows partition weight, the way cows partition energy in the dry period, a lot of the extra energy goes to coating the internal organs with fat. So you might not see it externally, but you can guarantee it's there. It's just sat around the organs. So, and it's the really hard part about body condition scoring cows, especially in this close-up dry period. Just because it's not there externally doesn't mean it's not there internally. So the only way we can have a guide of that is to actually look at the rations, see how much energy is being oversupplied in that dry period, do a bit of a calculation from there, and work out how much weight, in theory, our cows are gaining over that period of time. So in terms of body condition scoring, it's incredibly hard to get a visual picture of what's going on with all this internal fat being laid down. So if you are body condition scoring, ideally that 5 to 10 days pre-calving will allow you to see the full impact of the dry period on that cow. But a huge amount of that weight is going to be internal there. So it's really, really important we do look at the ration as well and keep a lid on how much energy is actually going into those close-up cows. Because again, going back to that graph a couple of slides ago, the amount of energy has a massive, massive impact on how much cows are going to eat in that post-calving period. The problem with that internal fat is cows will use that over the energy that you're putting in front of them in the fresh period. So instead of eating, they actually burn off that internal fat first, and then will cause a huge issue with milk yield, with ketosis, metabolic issues, all the rest of it. So really important to look at your ration, keep a lid on that energy, reduce some of that internal fat that we're going to be putting onto these cows, and bring that weight gain down so they maximize their intakes in that post-calving period there. Okay. So one of the things just to mention while we're talking about dry cow rations is metabolizable protein supply. Now this is a massive one when it comes to dry cows. Might not be something that a lot of people have heard before, might not be something that you've ever looked at in your dry cow diet, but it really is one of the most important metrics that we should all be looking at in a dry cow diet. Now, not to be confused with crude protein. When I say 1,200 grams of metabolizable protein, I don't mean 12% crude protein in the total diet. I mean 1,200 grams of metabolizable protein. So metabolizable protein is the actual amount of protein available to the cow after she's digested it in the rumen. Metabolizable protein system was developed sort of back in the early 90s. It's been around a long time. It provides a pretty good guide as to what's actually going on inside the cow, what's going on inside the rumen, and how much of that protein is actually going to be available to her on a daily basis. If we don't reach that 1,200 grams of MP figure, we run into a whole host of issues. We decrease muscle tone, we increase muscle breakdown, we decrease protein status of the cow, and we significantly reduce the colostrum quality that we're going to get out of these cows as well. Now, obviously, that has a knock-on effect to your calves, your calf nutrition, your heifer growth, replacements, all the rest of it. So sit down with the nutritionists, find out where your metabolizable protein supply is. If it's below 1,200 grams, how do we get it up to that 1,200 gram mark? It's quite a hard thing to do in the UK with the amount of green forage that we utilize, but it can be done. I would say the average dry cow ration in the UK would probably sat around half of that figure. So there are huge gains to be made on a lot of dry cow rations in terms of how well those cows are able to cope with transition by improving the protein status of those animals. 1,200 grams of metabolizable protein is ideally where we should be aiming for. In the States, they would regularly be looking for 13, 14, even 1,500 grams of metabolizable protein. Over here, it's not something a lot of people focus on, but it certainly should be, because it's a really important part of feeding dry cows. So bring that MP level up, get cows firing on all cylinders, and get the protein status of those animals bang on. So one thing we've talked a bit about today, we've mentioned it quite a few times, is ketosis, and obviously body condition score loss. But now I want to challenge a few of the norms around ketosis and ask really one simple question. Is it good or is it bad? And do we want ketosis? Do we not want ketosis? And what's everyone's thoughts around it, really? So Michael, just quick snap answer. Ketosis, good or bad? What would you say?
Bad.
Definitely bad. Yeah, definitely bad. One of those things that everything we do in dairy cows, dry cows, whatever it might be, is geared around reducing ketosis. It's always the big thing that's at the forefront of everyone's mind. It's ketosis and the reduction of improving that transition, decreasing metabolic disease. It's a big focus of vets. We've all done cow-side BHBs and cow-side NEFAs and all these various other tests to see if our cows have got ketosis and what issues are going to come from it. But if we actually look at ketosis in a bit more detail, ketosis is a perfectly natural state for any lactating animal to be in. Without ketosis, a lot of bodily functions couldn't actually occur. Ketosis is a pretty key driver in starting up calcium metabolism post-calving. Obviously, calcium is a pretty important one when it comes to milk yield. So ketosis is actually pretty vital for a lot of the internal functions that go on in cows. Every lactating mammal experiences ketosis throughout the lactation period. So it's perfectly normal for cows to do the same. So if we just have a quick look at how cows partition energy in the body, Once that basal metabolic function, so breathing, eating, heart rate, walking around, once those are met, everything else goes into feeding that calf on a daily basis. Or for us, milk yield. Yeah, everything else comes secondary to that. So why would Mother Nature, in all of her wisdom, give cows this disastrous disease that we spend so much time fighting just because she's working to feed her calf? Well, the answer is she didn't. Ketosis is there to provide energy for the cow and the calf, in theory, when the ration or dry matter intake do not allow her to do so. It allows her to mobilize some of her body fat to actually provide enough energy for milk yield to feed the calf, to supply that next generation, and so her progeny can then take off and fly into the wilderness. The problem with ketosis comes when we add a stressor in. Now, this is the key part in ketosis. The problem comes when we add in some inflammation, when we reduce intakes, when we add in lameness, when we add in mastitis, heat stress, social stress, milk fever, LDA, infection, whatever it might be. A huge amount of energy is used to fight inflammation. It's used to fight lameness, used to fight milk fevers, whatever it might be. It takes up a huge amount of energy in that cow. And that all gets added to that basal metabolic function. So the only thing that can increase that animal's energy requirements on a daily basis is that increase in basal metabolic function there. So if we add in a stressor on top of that, that's when ketosis becomes an issue. So if we think 40 kilos of milk roughly consumes about 3 kilos of glucose. So for every 40 kilos of milk that cow produces, we need to supply her with 3 kilos of glucose. So it's a huge amount of glucose that needs to come from the diet. Now, inflammation consumes 1 kilo of glucose every 12 hours. So if that cow is experiencing a stressor from whatever it might be, from being bullied, if she's a heifer, she's lame, she's mastitic, whatever it might be, there is a huge amount of energy that's being taken away from milk yield, that's being diverted away from the ration that we put in front of her to that inflammatory response and fighting off whatever infection, whatever stressor is causing that cow issues. 1 kilo of glucose in 12 hours, that's about 13 litres of milk, just over 13 litres of milk, in fact. So it's a huge, huge, huge amount of energy that goes to fighting inflammation and supplying that inflammatory response there. So the big thing with ketosis is reducing these stressors in that period of time. Cows are going to be ketotic. It's a perfectly natural state to be in. The big problem comes when we add in a stressor on top of that ketosis, which adds to that basal metabolic function, which then causes us an issue. So this is a really nice slide from Phil Cardoso. I absolutely love this slide. If you've got a cow doing 70 litres a day, she's eating well, she's got good milk qualities, no other issues, but she's got slightly elevated BHBs and NEFAs, leave her alone. Yeah, she's going to be ketotic, and it's perfectly normal for that cow to be ketotic. Yes, we want to maximize intakes post-calving so we can reduce that reliance on body reserves, but you cannot ration for a 70-litre cow. Yeah, as a nutritionist, it is impossible to ration for anything really much over 50 litres. She needs that body weight there to actually support that extra milk yield. So if you've got a 50, 60, 70-litre cow, no other issues, no milk fever, she's not lame, she's not mastitic, she's milking well, she's looking fine, leave that cow alone. You can do all the cow side tests you want. You can do BHBs, you can do NEFAs, you can do all the rest of it. I guarantee you they will come back to tell you that your dry cow ration or your fresh cow ration is awful and you should quit farming and sell the cows because your cow is ketotic. In reality, that cow is always going to be ketotic. It's the equivalent of running a marathon and then doing a lactate test and being surprised that your lactic acid is high after that marathon. Yeah. So if your cow looks fine, if there's nothing else going on with that cow, she's doing well, she's milking well, if she comes back with high BHBs and high NEFAs, leave her alone. Yeah. She is handling that fat, she is mobilizing fat absolutely fine. The liver's at a point where it's no problem at all in dealing with that extra fat that's coming through the system. So leave the animal alone, no problem with her whatsoever. Okay. So intakes then, moving on to a bit around intakes. Dry cows, as we've already mentioned, dry cows are a really important one to maximize intakes. Keeping rumen fills high in dry cows is vitally important over the whole dry period there. 3s are as low as we want to get on our dry cows. Obviously, dry cow rumen filling, the easiest thing in the world, left-hand side of the cow as you're looking at a back end. It's that sort of period, that space in between the little short ribs and the hip there. Look in that triangle. If it's very concave, then she's got low rumen fill. If it's blown out the side and very convex, then she's got high rumen fill. Simple as that. Rumen fill has a massive impact on how cows actually perform. Again, another nice graph that Premier kindly let us use. Week 4 milk yield versus dry cow rumen fill. Dry cows with a rumen fill of 1s and 2s, 4 or 5 litres difference there from our cows with rumen fills of 4s and 5s. So keeping rumen fill high as possible, but keeping a lid on energy in that dry period is really, really important for our dry cows. 6 kilos of forage NDF is the target. If they eat 6 kilos of forage NDF as a dry cow, they will eat 6 kilos of forage NDF as a fresh cow. It's really, really important that we keep those intakes up as high as physically possible. Now, coming on to the fresh cows, obviously, again, fresh cows and intakes, the single most important driver of fresh cow performance, along with energy and calcium, obviously. Now, Michael, I'm gonna pick on you again because I hope the gate is now open. But we can do all of the dry cow priming in the world. And then all of a sudden we can reduce that progress significantly in the fresh pen. So I just want to throw up a few photos that we took from our last visit to Coton Wood. That's the fresh cow pen slash sort of, you know, sick cow transition pen there. Pretty good on the face of it. Cows are looking reasonably well, plenty of feed in front of them, fantastic amount of space, nice airy shed, feed, absolutely no problem at all with that. Again, not too many issues with that image there. Looking at all the cows lying down, comfy straw beds, clean bedding, no problem at all. The problem comes when we start looking at this end of the shed. So there are 2 spaces for the cows to get to the feed barrier in this shed. One at this end and one at the other end. And there's a huge, huge gap in between that these cows are either going to walk all the way down that way or all the way down that way to get to the feed, get to the water, or get to the robotic milker. Now, this particular day, it was a reasonably warm day. A lot of the cows, as you can see here, stood down at this end of the shed. So we've got a massive, massive mob of cows here, and an even bigger mob of cows all lying down here. So if any one of these cows who are sat behind these ones here want to get out and round to the feed barrier, they can't, because they've got a big mob of cows from stopping them there. Okay. And it's simple things like that. Just have a look at what your cows are doing on a daily basis, because that can have a massive impact on how well they perform in that transition period. So Tony and Michael there, one of the big things we looked at is quite simply opening this gate in the middle, giving cows that extra space to actually access that feed trough there, because down at this end here, they're certainly not going to do it, because there's a big group of cows down there. And all of these cows on this particular day, they want to be close to the doors, they want to be close to the airflow. So you've got a big group of cows already stood down here, blocking any other cow's passage through to that feed barrier there, which is going to impact how much those cows are actually eating on a daily basis. So open the gate, let those cows through and give them that extra space to get to the ration there. Okay. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so we'll fly through a bit on the metabolic disease side of things. Milk fevers, calcium issues, a big one in the UK. 2 issues that we normally see in UK dry cow diets. The first one, calcium is normally well above requirement. We use a lot of green forage, so calcium is normally hugely oversupplied in the dry period. Second one, we see some very, very high potassium levels from green forage. Combine the 2 together, and it basically stops the hormonal mechanisms that control calcium metabolism in the cow. So There are a couple of things we can do to try and prevent this. So whether you use a full decad, partial decad, low calcium, calcium binders, or a high calcium ration, or whether you just have absolutely no idea and you bury your head in the sand, I would say pick one and stick with it. There are a huge amount of ways out there to prevent milk fevers on farm. The decad, partial decad diets are an absolutely fantastic tool for minimizing milk fevers on farms. Anything over 4% milk fevers, for me, is pretty unforgivable. There's certainly plenty of things we can do now to try and minimize milk fevers on farm as much as possible. The application of decad diets or calcium binders on farm give us a huge number of tools to actually reduce the risk of milk fevers in our cows. Obviously, not going to go through how each of those work on today. Whichever one you choose, I would encourage you to get your forage analysed beforehand. It's a vitally important part of dry cow rations. You need to get your forage analysed for minerals to see what you're playing with in the first place. If you're going to go down the full decad route, make sure you start adding calcium into the dry cow ration. Really important one. A lot of people put full decads in place because they've heard it works over in the States. It's not the same as the States. The States don't have grass silage. They've got maize and straw. That's all they use. They've got very, very low potassium forages anyway. Decad systems over here work incredibly well, but we do need to actually add calcium in a lot of instances over here. Partial decad, very, very simple system to put in place. Really, really nice one to help us control milk fevers, relatively easy to manage. Low calcium diets, they can be a bit of a headache in the UK. Because of the amount of green forage we've got, it can be an absolute nightmare to try and manage in the long term there. Ideally, we've got to get the calcium below 30 to 40 grams per head per day to actually make them work. Now, the only way we can normally do that in the UK is with calcium binders. If nothing else will work on your system, if you can't get decad to work, if you've got very high potassium forage, calcium binders do provide a pretty good last-ditch effort to get rid of milk fevers. They're clay binders, so they work by literally binding calcium in the ration, minimizing the level of calcium that way, and actually getting the cow systems to kick in by physically binding calcium in the diet. So handy tool if you've got nothing else to go for. High calcium diets, just don't do it, quite simply. A lot of people I come across, they'll just feed the milk and cow ration to dry cows. We're causing a huge number of issues with energy. B, we're causing a huge number of issues with calcium metabolism. Not something I would recommend for guys in the UK there. So moving on to LDAs, a really, really expensive transition issue, obviously. We've all experienced them at some point in time. We all know what causes them. We get an issue around calving, stops cows eating, empty digestive tracts, stomach fills with gas, and we get an LDA. Apologies for those of you who haven't had your lunch yet, but I'm assuming most of you have got reasonably strong stomachs, but that is an LDA there. You can see the twist in the gut. So quite a nasty business, and often a very expensive surgery to fix it. Anything 0 to 72 hours post-calving is normally a dry cow issue. So you've got something going on in your dry pen that's causing that LDA. Anything 72 hours plus is most likely going to be a fresh cow issue. So have a look at your fresh cow pens. Is it a similar sort of situation where with cow flow, what's stopping cows getting to the feed fence? What's stopping them eating that's causing the LDA? In the dry period, could be down to calcium metabolism, could be down to intakes in that fresh pen. I've seen it a couple of times in the UK where you get such low calcium levels in the dry cow diet, it actually inhibits smooth muscle tone in the gut. We then get poor food movement down the gut, empty stomach, LDA off the back of that. So LDAs are, in theory, a really easy one to fix. Often it's all about cow management when it comes to LDAs. So just to summarize then, last slide, transition is transition. 100 litres or 10 litres, it's all the same. Principles of transition are exactly the same across the board. Cost of poor transition to the dairy industry is millions of pounds a year, probably hundreds of thousands of pounds to the individual there. So find out where you can improve it, take that critical approach of your own farm, take those farm blinkers off and have a look at what's going on. Ketosis, some good and some bad. Let's try and change the way we look at ketosis on farm. If you've got a cow, she's looking good, she's doing 60, 70 odd litres, but she's got high BHBs and NEFAs, leave her alone. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that cow. Metabolic disease, again, milk fevers, LDAs, retain cleansings, record them, find out how many you're actually having and do something about it. If you're over some of those national averages there we talked about on the first slide, then we need to be doing something about it to try and bring them down. Cow comfort and cow flow is without doubt one of the most overlooked parts of transition. As we've already discussed today, it might be as simple as opening a gate to increase your fresh cow intakes there. It's not about spending millions of pounds on sheds every year. It's quite simple things that can make a big difference in the long run there. So hopefully that was a useful run through. And again, thank you all for listening today. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Brilliant presentation. I'm sure we've all learned something new today that we can take away and apply to our own farms. So yeah, we've a couple of questions that have came in. Someone has recently seen some fresh cows with a phosphorus deficiency. Nothing has changed. Why would they be getting a fresh cow phosphorus deficiency?
Most likely it's changing your forage. So forage is obviously a pretty changeable thing. Had a very similar situation with one of my farmers the other day, in that the calcium content of his forage doubled within the space of a week. Stayed that high for 3 or 4 weeks and then came back down again just as quickly. So I encourage you to grab a forage analysis, get it done for minerals, and find out what the phosphorus level in your forage is, because that's probably where it's come from.
Someone else is asking about calcium binders. Other than the cost, what would you say the other downsides of a calcium binder would be?
It's a great question. Calcium binders, they tend to cover up subclinical milk fever. They do a very good job, but what you will often see is quite a few retained cleansings. You'll get rid of milk fevers, but you do tend to see a few retained cleansings with calcium binders because of that subclinical milk fever that we can sometimes get because of them. Cows obviously have a calcium requirement, and low calcium diets take calcium levels below requirements, which is always a bit of an interesting one.
And someone else unfortunately can't get a TMR ration to their close-up dry cows, and they're currently using round bale silage and a dry cow nut. Should they continue to produce round bales to feed them, or would a hay, straw, or other type of forage be good for them?
It sort of depends on the energy density of your round bale and how much they're eating. I mean, get your forage analysed, find out what the energy density of that forage is, rough calculation of what they're eating on a daily basis, and it's reasonably easy from there to calculate how much energy those cows are consuming on a daily basis. If it's over that sort of 120 to 140 bracket there by a huge amount, then you could well be see some benefits by adding in some lower energy density forage, definitely.
Great, thank you, Mark. I'm just going to quickly pass over to my colleague Nick, who's going to give us an update on what AHD have been up to, and just stay tuned because we've got a lot of more interesting things to tell you after Nick's update as well.
And if you'd like to flick on in essence of time or importance of time, and I'm going to just reflect on the fact of throughout the last year through COVID that we've continued to try and develop the strategic dairy farm network. We've now got 22 farms across the Wales, England and Scotland. and it's all been down to the people, including the likes of Tony and Michael, who have supported us throughout COVID in delivering webinars rather than the physical meetings. And I'll come back to that, along with the likes of Hannah and consultants like Mark, who have supported delivering these webinars. So if you flick on a slide, one of the areas that we are starting to focus ever more on is around carbon footprinting, and a number of the farms, 10 in total so far, but further farmers have either done them through their milk buyer or other means. So we're starting to build a picture of how that environmentally, how we sit within our strategic dairy farms. We've also recently had the start of March, Carbon Week, and focused on that. And I'd encourage you to go to the website and have a look at some of the activities that we delivered. 5 webinars covering a number of different areas, including sequestration and really some of the basic things around carbon. So have a look at those at your leisure as well. Thanks, Hannah. Now, as we move on, strategic dairy farms are doing 3 years as a strategic dairy farm, and I just put a call out there to all of you to think about whether you are interested in becoming one, and those circles highlight the key areas where we want to recruit. But also happy to talk to anyone who feels that they would benefit from engaging as a strategic dairy farm, and benefit others to bring people onto farm when we get to that point again, and engage with the network to move forward and continue to build. So we're looking to get to 25, and if you flip to the next slide, we're also looking to consider how we can engage that previous idea around environment, and we're looking for some specific environment farms that we can focus around the sustainability of dairy, and so that will be a key part. We are looking to move back in the summer. We will, we hope, if all goes well with plans both for our government in England across the devolved administrations as well, and COVID becomes in recessing, then we hope to get back out onto farm again. And we will still deliver webinars. We'll look to have a balance of on-farm physical meetings, along with webinars where we continue this process where we've built up such a wide support. I've touched on the sustainability and environment farm, so please contact if you're interested in considering that. And we'll also be looking at new ways of delivering for the audience, both on digitally and physical meetings, mixing up the way that we deliver those strategic farms. Thanks, Hannah. So one of the biggest ways of engaging the farmers through these and through the strategic dairy farms has continued to be the benchmarking that we do. And all of the 22 dairy farms that we work with closely update their KPIs. And through the KPI Express tool, it gives farmers the way to compare not only against the strategic dairy farms, but against yourself and against industry targets. Now, I draw attention to the fact that through this month, we're doing some updating of that. And for those consultants and feed specialists on the call today, which hopefully there are a number, there is going to be a consultant option, and that will give you the ability to put farmers' details into the KPI Express tool and look at any one of those 9 KPIs, technical and financial measures, and be able to talk to your farmers about how you can engage with that. So look out for that change. It will be there by May, and we hope that we can give you guidance. The team behind the development can give you guidance with regards to how to engage with that. We're also looking to bring in some environmental measures, and not only is there within the KPIs at the moment the proxy measures such as age at first calving, but also looking to bring out later in the summer some environment measures that will also give you the chance to benchmark against those. So go to the AHDB website. The landing page for dairy will give you the opportunity then to click through to the KPI Express tool. Thanks, Hannah. Delayed reaction on those.
Thanks, Nick, for that great update. Michael, I just want to come back to you and actually ask you what, have you opened the gate for a start, and have you seen any changes have you from the advice that you've had from Mark?
We have opened the gate, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's just yeah, it's not ongoing. Yeah, shall we looking at the the energy level that we spoke about with Mark. We have just taken some of the algarin and sugar beet out, and just having soya, just cut the cut the energy density of the diet down a little bit, and yeah, just try and follow that advice and see how it goes, basically.
Great, thank you, Michael. And Mark, what would you say would be your sort of 3 key learnings to take home from today then?
So the first one is recording transition disease incidents, the big one. Second one, take a critical look at your dry cow ration. What's actually going on there? You're oversupplying energy, you're not. Take off those farm blinkers and be as critical as you can be about your own setup. And then the third and final one there, ketosis, it's not always a bad thing. If that cow's looking particularly good, she's milking well, she's doing well, leave her alone. Not a huge issue, that particular cow.
Thanks very much, both. So what's next? We have a brilliant opportunity to learn more from Mark in an online focus group meeting on the 27th of April at 12:30. We'll be joining Michael for that as well. And it's just an opportunity for our Debbie levy payers to come along with more questions and just dig a bit deeper into the subject of transition. The numbers will be limited, so please book in as soon as you can, and the details for booking in are on the screen now. You can book via ke.events@ahdb.org.uk or call the number on the screen. We also have this great transition wall chart. As Mark mentioned, it's incredibly important to record these incidences of metabolic diseases and monitor. So we have these massive wall charts that you can put up on your wall, and we will supply those to you with stickers, and then you can write your cow number down and record any incidences. So these are available through your local knowledge exchange manager, or you can feel free to contact myself and we will get these sent out to you. Alternatively, we also have our in-calf guide, and that is a hard copy that you can receive from your knowledge exchange manager on the bottom right hand of the screen. And this has a chapter on transition as well. And if there's any block calvers listening, we have a transition webinar specifically for block calvers on the 22nd of June with Buscott Wick Strategic Dairy Farm. And I just want to thank you all very much for joining us today, and have a lovely afternoon in the sun, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks, bye-bye.